And Amy, you know that Hillary bite and that moment in the debate where she said, I was preparing for the debate. You know what else I prepared for? The presidency of the United States, because it's all I've ever wanted. I mean, she sounded like Reese Witherspoon in Election. It's just so insouciant.
Oh, well, she's got, the keeper trapper or whatever you call it. And
Yeah, trapper keeper.
Trapper keeper took copious notes. She studied. She studied hard, and I think it paid off last night because
it's funny. She has all the
beat
wrong
Trump.
answers for all that studying. You'd think she'd have more of the right answers. Here's one of the topics where substantive topics they got into, policing. It's a salient issue, of course, against the backdrop of the police-involved shootings in Charlotte and Tulsa in the last week. And the question of implicit bias. In other words, it's a fancy way of saying, the police systemically racist? That's the question that Lester Holt posed to Hillary Clinton. Here's her response.
Secretary Clinton, last week you said we've got to do everything possible to improve policing, to go right at implicit bias. Do you believe that police are implicitly biased against black people?
Lester, I think implicit bias is a problem for everyone, not just police.
Yeah, Lester, everybody's racist who's not part of my constituency groups. And as we know, because she told Steve Harvey, she can talk to white people.
She's the white whisperer.
She's the white people whisperer. She's the white walker,
Yeah,
more
she
like.
pretty much called Donald Trump racist, sexist, and that he's not prepared to be president.
Yeah, well, for more on the debate last night and these topics in particular, we're happy to be joined by our friend Steve Cortes. He is a member of Trump's National Hispanic Advisory Council and a Chicagoan. Hey, Steve, thanks for joining us.
Dan, good morning. Thanks for having me. Hi, Amy.
Hi.
So what about that? What about Hillary Clinton as a bridge between the African-American and white communities to explain to white people in particular how we're all racist?
Well, I think it's tiresome, honestly. The left is so intellectually bankrupt that they always revert to the same playbook, which is we're going to call the Republicans racist, and we're going to say it so often without any proof, but we're just going to go on a smear campaign and say it so often via the mainstream media that eventually the narrative sort of takes hold. And this isn't new with Donald Trump. They did it with Mitt Romney. They did it with McCain. They've done it with every Republican nominee in my lifetime, certainly. It's part of their playbook because they'd rather name call and smear than talk about real solutions. And I, frankly, am really proud of Donald Trump in contrast to a lot of Republicans. He's making a really deliberate and intentional outreach to the African-American community, to Hispanics. He's trying to tell people of color that, you know what, the Democratic Party cares a whole lot about your votes. But after that, they take you for granted. Your communities have serious challenges of high crime, poor failing schools, and a lack of economic opportunity. Give us a chance on the Republican side, give the Trump administration a chance to actually make your lives better, to make you safer and more prosperous, and we will not take you for granted the way the Democrats have.
So, Steve, you think Donald Trump won the debate last night?
I don't know. My honest guess, I'm very partisan, obviously, in favor of Donald Trump, so I think he did well. But my honest guess is it was roughly a draw. I think that both candidates spent a lot of time in the weeds. I don't think we focus enough on the macro.
Yeah.
And to me, the macro is on the negative side, Hillary, you are completely untrustworthy. The American people simply can't trust you. On the positive side is we have a plan and an agenda that could get America growing again and that can get America safer again, both domestically and abroad. So I want to hear more about those macros. My guess is we will in the next debate. I think this first time in some ways, Trump used a boxing analogy. He's promoted a lot of fights, by the way, over the years. The first one, I think they were feeling each other out, fairly careful punching. My guess is it won't be that way in the next debate.
Well, I'll tell you what, in terms of the macro, Judge Napolitano on Fox, Andrew Napolitano, he torched Trump for, in his opinion, completely failing to exploit Hillary's untrustworthiness on a range of issues, and most notably the private server, where he started off fairly strong, talking about her aides and confidants invoking the fifth, but then kind of trailed off. And by the time they got around to cybersecurity, he was talking about his 10-year-old son, Barron, as much of a threat as Romanian hackers. I mean, it was just kind of a muddled answer where there were like flashing lights around Hillary Clinton on this topic, and he ignored them.
No, Dan, I agree. She opened herself up to attack, and he was not terrific last night at taking those openings. I think he'll get better in the next debate. I would also say this, though. I think Lester Holt, and I was prepared to really like him, a Chicago reporter for many years. Lester Holt, I think, was also unfair, though. In some ways, it was 2 against 1.
Where was he unfair?
Where was he unfair?
Yeah, where was he unfair?
Toward the end?
because he questioned Trump. He brought up everything that is incredibly controversial about Trump, things like birtherism, things like his tax returns. He did not challenge Hillary Clinton in any way in that fashion.
Well, they didn't talk about Benghazi or Clinton.
Types of questions and almost thematic questions, rather about the world rather than about her personally. He did not mention.
Yeah, but your candidate could have inserted himself, and when they talked about his tax return and about trustworthiness, he could have spun that about Benghazi and how she let four soldiers. Well, four people, not four soldiers.
Or more on point, he could have spun it about, you mentioned the emails, but also those Wall Street Bank speech transcripts. Why didn't he invoke that? I mean, that was an opportunity, certainly.
No, again, I'm not excusing. I think Trump had some opportunities missed, to be sure, and I don't think he'll miss them in the next time. I think he did. Listen, too, though, I don't want to be too critical of Trump. I think he also showed the American people that he can absolutely be presidential, that he is ready for this stage, literally the stage last night, but more importantly, the metaphorical stage of the presidency and to occupy the Oval Office. But yes, I think the fact that Benghazi was not even mentioned last night, to me, that's a travesty. Trump certainly should have brought it up, but Lester Holt should have as well. I think if you were to go back and look at the transcript, you will see he did not ask her one penetrating question, whereas he asked Trump 5 incredibly penetrating questions. So I hope that the moderator will be more balanced in the next one. And I also hope that Trump will be more assertive in the next one.
And I hope that Donald Trump doesn't praise himself again for not bringing up Bill Clinton's past. Do you think he stepped in it a little bit there?
I think perhaps. No, I think I only saw that after the debate, right? Did he do it during?
No, he did during. He alluded to that fact that,
I'm not going to
go there.
I'm not going to make this comment.
Oh,
yeah.
right.
But then afterward, he said that my one regret is that I didn't bring up his transgressions and all that.
You're obsessing.
Right.
Now you're turning into Trump. You're obsessing about this.
An inarticulate and inelegant moment. Again, to me, a draw. I think Hillary Clinton continued to come across the American people for what she is, which is a pure continuation of the present policies, which most Americans don't agree with. 70% of Americans think the country's headed in the wrong direction. So she is clearly no change, continuity, and I think her unlikable nature really showed through. On the other side, for Trump, I think he showed that he can be and is of presidential caliber. On the downside for Trump, I don't think he seized opportunities that were laid in front of him. There were a few meatball pitches that he could have hit really, really hard, and he didn't.
The debate started off well, although I was a little disoriented because when Hillary Clinton came out on stage in that red pantsuit, it burned my retinas. So I was struggling to kind of recover and focus on the debate, and I was having some difficulty. But Trump started off very strong in the signature line about the career politician, right? You've had 30 years. That's a pretty hefty probationary period, 30 years, and now you're coming up with solutions and you're telling us to go to your website and read your book. What the heck is that? I thought that was a nice moment, and it's something he could build on to make his larger argument against the political ruling class in D.C., and that kind of trailed off after the first half hour as well.
Right. I know, and I think we'll be going back to that theme, that if you're happy with status quo, and I would say this quite honestly to anyone, and I'm not trying to be, smart aleck about it. If you're happy with status quo, Hillary Clinton is your candidate. There's no doubt about that. If you think, 1% to 2% growth is fine, if you think falling incomes are fine, a world that is spinning out of control, a caliphate in the Middle East, terrorism here at home, if that's okay, if that's the best we can do as America, then Hillary Clinton should be the president. If you think that there's enormous problems with both our economy and security, if you think that security and prosperity will be better handled and better managed by Donald Trump, then we need to change things and change them dramatically. And then I'm certainly in that latter camp.
Donald Trump has done so well on the campaign trail, talking about immigration and securing our border and keeping Americans safe. Why was that lost in last night's debate?
Yeah, there wasn't enough talk about that. There's certainly a lot of talk about trade in regards to our border and in regards to Mexico and NAFTA, but not a lot about the border. Again, I'm not trying to make excuses for my candidate, but I don't think Holt was entirely fair. There should have been more questions about, for instance, with Hillary, why do you support sanctuary cities? And if you don't, then tell us you changed your mind. I think sanctuary cities are an outrage. It's, number one, just bad policy, but number two, it's illegal. It's literally against the law, and yet it's being completely condoned by the administration and by Hillary Clinton, although she's being very evasive about answering those questions lately. So, again, I'm hopeful that that's another issue. I think in the second debate, we need to hear Benghazi, we need to hear Clinton Foundation, and I personally would like to hear sanctuary city.
Yeah, sanctuary city, that's a good point. And then in terms of an entry into the larger discussion about immigration, that is a fair point. Also, Steve Cortes, Trump National Hispanic Advisory Council member, you're also a contributor on CNBC, financial services background. The discussion on trade, How would you characterize that? Is that back and forth between Trump and Hillary on TPP and trade policy generally? Was that a win for Trump?
I think it was. I do think that's where he definitely scored. The average American has been really let down by the crony capitalist, corporatist system that Washington has right now created. It's wonderful for big business. It's wonderful for Washington, D.C., but it hasn't been great for the average American. Over the last decade, 4 out of 5, according to McKinsey Consulting, 4 out of 5 U.S. households have seen their income go down. And so while the stock market's at all-time highs, if you're an owner of assets, you've done incredibly well. If you have a lot of real estate and stocks, if you're a striver, if you're an earner, somebody trying to make their way up the ladder, it's been an incredibly tough economy. And I think part of that is the corporatist system that has been erected, which is largely about trade deals, which, by the way, in often cases are not free trade. I'm for free trade. These deals are often all about managed trade and often to the detriment of the U.S. worker.
All right, he is Steve Cortes, Trump National Hispanic Advisory Council member. And Steve, since Trump likes to drop the names of media types in his debate, you got Hannity, Howard Stern, Wolf Blitzer. Maybe see what you can do about having him mention a Dan and Amy in the St. Louis debate, will you?
We'll do. Let's see if we can get that in there.
All right, thanks for joining us, Steve. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.